All right, let's dive into something that's going to stretch your brain a little. We're talking about the fundamental architecture of reality itself. It's a journey that actually starts before the Big Bang. And believe it or not, it ends with a totally new way of looking at creativity. So let's get into it. First things first, I want you to try and forget everything you think you know about how the universe started. You know, the Big Bang happening in some empty black void. Let's just park that idea for a minute and start with a really provocative question. What if the universe wasn't created at all? Not in the way we usually think about it. What if, instead, reality as we know it is actually the solution to a problem? I mean, a beautiful, elegant, self-organizing answer to a fundamental contradiction that simply could not be left unresolved. This is the wild idea we're going to unpack today. Okay, so to really get our heads around this, we have to go back, way back. We have to start before the beginning with the concept of nothing. But hold on, this isn't the empty, silent nothing you're picturing. It's something way, way more dynamic. Meet the null state. No, this isn't a void just waiting to be filled. It's a pre-physical state. This is before space, before time, of total absolute potential. Just try to imagine a state that contains everything that could possibly exist, but also, at the same time, contains the opposite of everything that could possibly exist. It's a logical mess, an impossible, completely unstable paradox. And just to be super clear about this, we are not talking about empty space. Empty space is just a box, right? A container. The null state is what's called a plenum. It is completely full. It's a superposition of infinity and not infinity existing at the exact same time. It's a fundamental contradiction that is just screaming for a resolution. So how does an impossible paradox solve itself? Well, through something called recursive collapse. Because the paradox can't be fixed from the inside, it's basically forced to spit out the simplest possible structure that can refer back to itself. This is the very first tiny step out of that paradox and into what we might call existence. Now that initial act, that first little bit of self-reference, it isn't some one-time event, no way. It's more like the first domino falling in a massive chain reaction, a process that kicks off the weaving of the very fabric of reality. And this is just a brilliant way to see how it all unfolds. We start in what you could call dimension -1. That's the null potential we talked about. The paradox forces the creation of dimension 0, which is just that simple, recursive line of self-reference. And from that single, tiny thread, the three spatial dimensions that we all live in emerge as a stable, structured lattice. So what does this all mean? Well, it gets us to the core hypothesis here. The universe isn't a static box just filled with stuff. It's an active, ongoing process. You might even call it a computation that is constantly solving for its own existence by building stable structures. Okay, so what is this structure actually made of? Well, the fundamental units are called quantinodes, but don't think of them as physical particles like little marbles. They're more like points of pure logical interaction. And they have these properties, spin, phase, charge, and even a stabilizing sleep state that basically just dictate how they relate to each other. And these nodes, they don't just float around randomly. To get stable, they naturally align themselves into this three-axis hexagonal lattice. It turns out this geometric shape is the most efficient way to resolve all that underlying logical tension. And boom, that becomes the geometric foundation of space itself. Okay, so we have a structure for space. But what about the stuff in space? You know, particles, matter, all of that. What even is mass, really? Well, according to this model, mass isn't something you have, it's something you do. Now, what's really fascinating here is the distinction the model makes. On one hand, you can have a simple, self-contained shape, kind of like a loop. That's called kinematic closure. It exists, but it's massless, like a photon. But for something to have mass, it needs what's called dynamical persistence. It has to be an active process that is constantly interacting with everything around it just to keep existing. This gives us a whole new way of thinking about mass. Effective mass isn't some property you're born with. It's basically the energy bill that a structure has to pay to keep itself going. It's an interaction obligation. If it stops interacting, it just stops existing. And this model brilliantly explains something called the mass gap. You know, why are particles either totally massless or they have some minimum amount of mass with nothing in between? Well, it's because persistence isn't free. There's a minimum energy cost to run the keep existing process. You either pay that cost and have mass, or you don't and you're massless. There's just no middle ground. And get this, as a kind of cool side effect, this whole idea that massive particles have to constantly recalculate their existence through interaction, that also gives us a really elegant reason for a universal speed limit. Part of their energy is always tied up just maintaining themselves, and that puts a natural cap on how fast they can move through space.
All right, let's zoom all the way out now. If the universe is just a structure built from information, where did all that information come from in the first place? And this, my friends, leads us to a truly mind-bending philosophical idea.
Welcome to the concept of the infinite index. The idea here is that every possible pattern, I mean everything, from the number 2 to the laws of gravity to the blueprint for a giraffe, already exists as a potential within some abstract, non-physical math space. It's like an infinite library of every idea, every form, and every process that could ever possibly be. Now, this framework makes some pretty profound claims. First, every single possible pattern already exists in this library. Second, the tools you'd need to understand those patterns, like math and logic, are also patterns in the library. And third, physical systems, like our brains, are basically just sampling devices, pulling out patterns that happen to be compatible with the physical laws of our specific universe. And this leads to this really powerful reframing of what it even means to be creative. I mean, think about it. If all possibilities already exist in this index, then invention isn't about making something from nothing. It's about being the first person to discover a pattern and combine it with other patterns in a new and meaningful way. This all leads to a pretty stunning conclusion. Our physical reality, with all its specific laws and constants, is just one possible configuration that happens to be playing out. It's like one single book that's been pulled off the shelf of a library that contains every single book that could ever possibly be written. Which, of course, leaves us with one final provocative question. This whole incredible journey from a simple logical paradox all the way to the structure of reality suggests that all the patterns are already out there, just waiting in this vast library of what's possible. The only real question left is, what will we choose to discover next?